This is episode 15 of OverSight, and I'm not speaking this way because I've become a very sensual individual who's trying to appeal to a late night radio crowd, including lonely spinsters and people who just dream of being someone. It's because I got a bad throat. Luckily, I've got two people who probably love the sound of their own voices more than they should. Actually, that's just mean, isn't it? I mean, it's fine to like the sound of your own voice. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, everyone else doesn't have to, which is fine. That's what the show's all about. So, usual co-host, Monte Cristo, who, every time you do a new show, like Worlds or MSI or, some of the old shows back in the day, because you've actually really pulled off kind of the very professional image, Monty, and you always look very slick with your clothes, and you always have a certain fashion style. That's actually the one reason why I do like when people keep posting that picture of you with the long hair from ages ago. Because what I do is, you know that like technique where if you're going for a job interview, you just imagine the other person naked or whatever, and then it gives you sort of intellectual superiority. I just imagine you like that all the time, and then I understand the person.
Hey,
more
me wearing
this.
all black and a motorcycle jacket and cowboy boots still looked good. It was just a different style.
Didn't, mate.
And I'll do it again. I will do it again just to annoy you.
No, it doesn't annoy me at all. I'm just saying I feel like that represents who you are more than this admittedly glimmering facade that you have now constructed and sold to the youth.
Hey, I realized that at a certain point that I had to be presentable in the real world. Unfortunately, That meant no more long, beautiful hair and dressing like a heavy metal cowboy. So, but it's still there. I still have all the clothes. It can happen again at any moment.
So speaking of realizing that you need to look presentable and that long hair and a cowboy from hell look is not in fact necessarily appropriate for esports in 2018, we've got Volamel on the show at the moment, who now looks like clean shaven. He's actually sort of like he's given himself something of a makeover, and he's also somewhat been, I would say, justified in hyping up Fleta. He thought that was like an edgy comment to make, but it certainly helps that he'd had some good performances initially. So obviously the Overwatch League has begun. So let's start here, Monty. When we come into this league, most people, in fact, I don't think I saw anyone who did a power ranking who didn't have the top 3 teams as the Korean teams. But the top 3 Korean teams did not sweep all of their games. So let's start there. Are the Korean teams the clear-cut best teams in the Overwatch League?
We'll get to that in a minute. Why don't you talk about how you came out to view the Overwatch League in person for the first week?
What do you want me to say?
What was your experience like?
One thing I was actually quite surprised by was that I maybe went into the crowd or saw the crowd maybe like 2 or 3 times, and actually every time I saw the crowd it did look like people had on the jerseys of the teams that were playing, which might sound like no big deal to most people, but actually that's nothing like esports that I've seen in the past. Like, first of all, Korean fans famously, who have obviously their own leagues that run every single week, not a lot of them ever wear a jersey, actually. Jerseys aren't a big thing in Korea, so it's always hard to tell when you go there, like, who's actually a fan of the worst team, for example. Usually you go there and you think these are all just SK Telecom fans, or back in the day, League of Legends, it would obviously be CJ Entus, these were the teams that were very popular. And obviously going to lots of Counter-Strike events over the years, yeah, I'm used to people being in the crowd with jerseys, but because you go and, you're going to see 7 matches in a row, it's usually more like, what area do you come from, or who's your favourite player? It's more like that. Whereas actually I did notice, I don't know whether this was intentional, but it seemed like the fans of the game were the ones watching that exact game, and actually maybe some of them left for the other games. I don't know. It was actually quite interesting in that sense, because if you looked out, you could see the colour scheme of the teams playing. So that's actually quite unique, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I've actually noticed this too. I didn't think there would be that many. Yeah, it would be, obviously, having been to many esports events in a lot of countries, there would be that many jerseys in the audience. But since they sell them right there at the arena, it's actually, you look out in the crowd and most people are wearing at least a hat or a jersey or something like that. It's not like Blizzard's giving them away either. People are just coming and buying them or coming with them already. So it's already been like a really different esports experience for me in that way. I definitely agree with you.
And then the other part to that would be, okay, logically you could have thought to yourself, right, well, you're going to see a lot of Gladiators or Valiant gear because it's LA, right? This is the home crowd. But actually, that wasn't the case at all. Like, yes, they definitely, when they were playing, like Valiant, for example, was a very popular team. But like, I saw tons of people with like Houston Outlaws jerseys, for example, you know, and this, again, this is not in nowhere near Texas right now when you're having an event in LA. So that part actually surprised me a little bit. That sort of gave me some sort of a flicker of hope that you can because my assumption there is that you have actually tapped into something of a casual Overwatch crowd that probably wasn't in esports before. And that's something where I think that's probably the angle that I know people already said that that's what they wanted with the geolocation aspect, but I don't think you could have assumed that would happen, actually. I think the best case scenario initially was let's hope we get the esports crowd.
I mean, I always thought that there were going to be a bunch of people who would come in because of geolocation. I mean, you know that. I was very bullish on it. So it's far from being proven, of course, especially as the long-term goal is to go to home arenas and fill those, like put actual asses in seats. But I think as, you know, at first look, it seems like at least it has done some work in that regard.
Yeah. Although I will say, like, I'll tell you this, Monty, just because you'll appreciate this at least, and everyone watching will, because obviously this show is about people who love to sound their own voice. So I did go to the Overwatch League, right? And I did get sort of a harsher pulled on me because Monty put my name on the list, but it wasn't on any list. So I was stood there, right? And I was saying to this, you know, very amenable gentleman, he was saying, you know, what's your name? And obviously, listen, I'm not mentally ill. Like, aside from when I'm on talk shows, I just act like a normal person. So I just said Duncan Shields. I didn't say Thorin or anything. I just said Duncan Shields. He started looking down this list. What publication are you with, though? And I was going, well, I mean, I sort of write for myself a bit, you know. And he goes, oh, right. And he gave me a look, right, as though like I had like a blog or something. I was like, oh, because these are the media ones. And I was like, no. I do, like, you know, interviews and talk shows. I have a YouTube channel. And he goes, oh, right. But what is the name of the publication? And I go, no, again, it's just me, you know. And then he goes, right, I think I'm gonna have to talk to someone. And there was a part of me, right, studying the slide of media, loads of fans queuing up for the first game. Did
you have to like hold your hand as it was going for your cell phone to start shit tweeting?
Oh no, there was just a part of me that for a second thought about just shouting out, I am the esports journalist of the year 2017. Does anyone
I thought you were
here
going to tweet that.
No.
It's shouted like into the internet, as it were.
It would be like the equivalent of that famous thing where supposedly if Freemasons are in trouble, you know, they're supposed to shout out like, you know, will no one help the widow's son? And then anyone who's a Freemason, like, supposed to jump in and like save them, whatever. It would have been like that. Does anyone here know about esports?
So funny story. Like, while this is going on, obviously I was sending like a bunch of emails, and they were like, you know, it was opening day, and so it was crazy, and I'm sure a lot of people were trying to get in, and they had like 85 different publications there, and so I was telling people backstage, I was like, look, you need to get Thorin in. I can't be held responsible for what he says if he doesn't get in, and it will not be helpful for you. And also, he's the esports journalist.
Wouldn't have been a good look.
To probably fucking let him into this building.
But in the end, I did indeed get in. I wasn't in any way blacklisted or anything. It was the opposite. I wasn't on a list. That's, you know, blacklist would be to be put onto a list. I wasn't on a list, but I got in and I got to see the games. And also, interestingly enough, because they didn't do casting on the first day, because obviously I was also there to support my mate Semler, who's coming over from CSGO, I actually got to hear those guys basically doing what, as far as I can tell, was the first ever times they'd done like a practice cast, and they were sort of figuring it out. And I have to say, funnily enough, anyone who saw the actual broadcast itself, they didn't really need to practice at all, because these are two people who in their own ways are obviously very professional. I mean, in terms of hexagrams, he's obviously incredibly comfortable with the game. And Semler is someone where I actually think he did a really good job of not giving away that he didn't know that much about the game and that he's just come over, you know, because he still kind of tapped into the same qualities as a caster that I think he has in CSGO, you know, where you get into the excitement of something, or you kind of get wrapped up in how crazy a certain set of frags are, or you make a side joke, etc. So, which obviously is the skill set you would hope someone would bring over initially before they become an expert anyway. Because actually, I'll ask you this, Monty. One of the things in life, when people sometimes ask me, like other esports journalists, right, sometimes they'll say stuff to me like, or how do you sort of craft a persona, or how do you decide, like, you know, how you want to be seen? And I actually do have a theory on this, which was a few years back. I forget what book I read something like this in, but someone said something along the lines of, like, you should actually try and have in mind what your core qualities would be. And so I did exactly that. I picked out like sort of 2 or 3 things that I wanted to be like the core qualities that people thought of when they thought of me. And so what I would do then as a result was any time in my career a decision came along and, I could go either way on this one. Yeah, I like kind of both options. I would try and think, right, what would someone with these 3 qualities pick of these 2 options, and then I would go down that direction, Now, I'm not saying all those qualities were necessarily what everyone else would pick for me, but I think in general it actually worked. And it does kind of like...
So here's the thing too that's crazy that people think it's like, so you craft this on-screen persona or whatever. People think it's an on-screen persona, but I realize the same thing, that if you intentionally choose what kind of personality you want to have, you can actually, like you're saying, just imagine that, basically will it into being by changing the way that you react to certain things. And I realized that like as a teenager, and so I just sort of did it. And it's definitely helped out a lot, where it's also easier when you don't have to have that on-screen persona versus not an on-screen persona. Obviously, like we all play it up a little bit, but it's just more of a heightened version of the personality, rather curated. Because being something you're not is very exhausting. But it's easier just to continue or trying to get yourself to think a different way, like an actor would. And so I think it's just easier to heighten that, or like you say, curate it at an entertainment level, which I think is really fascinating. But a lot of people don't think that way. Or the other thing that they do is they start saying things like, oh, I can't do that, or I don't do things that way. And I'm just like, well, you could change that. It's not that big of a deal. But I also like it because the more you do that, the more you sort of become a symbol of something you believe in, and you start losing your actual personality. It's a very weird process. But
the reason why I thought it was an interesting point to make is because obviously the mistake a lot of people make here is like they just decide like, oh, I want to be this sort of person. Maybe they admire someone who's got a lot of charisma, or they admire someone who's very funny or something. But if you don't naturally have those qualities, it's going to be a tough road if you pick those as your main things. I'd probably pick some things that actually apply to you now, and then just try and work on those strengths. Yeah. So okay, Volamel, you are young on the path. Do you have? Is there one quality you could name us right now that would typify you?
Not to kind of borrow a quality that I think you kind of personify, Thorin, but I really enjoy the kind of history around Overwatch.
Okay, yes, right.
Yes, exactly, of course. I really enjoy the history of like where these teams come from Apex and like the Challenger series. I kind of always thought it was sad that nobody really paid attention. Well, not nobody, but like journalist wise in the community, there's a hardcore group of people that do pay attention to the Challenger series. But I always thought that it was really interesting to see these teams come up, and like the GC Busan coming up and rising up and performing to the level that they did was really interesting, because if we remember, they traded games with LW Red and NC Foxes, and just the history of everything. It's in maybe a little bit of analysis here and there, but just the history, I would say. My one thing that I think I'm focusing on right now.
Okay. The keeper of the memories approach. I like it.
I mean, here's what people don't realize is like, I don't in any way pretend to have like sole dominion over that. You actually need lots of people to do that, because as you find in all the big esports games now, I mean, CS is maybe the only one where you could still be the one guy who knows everything about the top teams, but every other game has so many regions and so many teams and so many leagues. It's pretty much logistically impossible to follow it all. Mm-hmm. And you want people in each game who are going that in depth, Like I wouldn't out of choice have gone into games like League of Legends. I would just stuck with my bread and butter, So I think we need more of those people, actually. I think people maybe naively think, oh, that's his thing and I'll do this. Like, no, we need think about real historians. You don't just have one dude. Like, that's what happened in the Roman times.
That's true.
Come on, I'm still working on the Middle Ages. I haven't got to that yet. Like, oh, when's that book going to be out about the Renaissance? Like, yeah, I'm one dude, aren't I? So I spun that back into like some sort of mad like thing of like, I am but a man. I am just a man.
But if you do want some crazy historical books, I was recommending these to like Bjergsen, because he was asking about a translation of Marcus Aurelius. Then I got into some other conversations with some other people on that chain about like Greek and Roman history in general.
I mean, if you're going to be a TSM player, I'd just be all over stoicism. You need a lot of that in your life if you're going to make it, you know.
Dealing with your fan base, dealing with the inevitable disappointment. I would say they need a good dose of Buddhism so that they can understand that the world is suffering, right? Because they're just constantly bound to the wheel of samsara. So that's what I would do if I was them. Stoicism, let's go with full Buddhism, you know. But what I was saying was there are these books by this man named Daniel Boorstin, who used to be the Librarian of Congress of America, who's one of the most insane historians. And he wrote this trilogy of books called like The Discoverers, The Seekers, and The Creators. And one of these books is basically like an insane history of Western science and exploration. One of them is about philosophy and religion, and one of them is about artists and composers. And somehow he kept all of this in his brain and could tell you like sequentially in the West how things were developing through like That's ancient crazy. Greece towards to the 20th century. It's nuts. Anyway, yes. Great books.
Well, no, what I love about that one too is I've no doubt this was the quest of a lifetime. 10 years, 20 years. Sadly, he didn't have to meet a real sweet spot for a Reddit deadline and hope he didn't get downvoted in the first 10 votes. Different mediums.
He also had the sick tenure position of being like the Librarian of Congress and a professor, so he could just sit there. When's your tenure track position coming in, Thorin, where you can just sit there and work on your long-term projects?
I mean, I'm sort of getting there with the Patreon, mate. One day, maybe the Screwluminati will in fact fund me, as they did many others in history. So, right, let's start out here then.
Okay, we'll talk about the Korean teams and how they drop some maps now. We'll actually get into some talk about Overwatch.
So first and foremost, for anyone who didn't watch any of the games or only saw and is a casual fan, was it a big deal that any of them dropped games? Like, was it a big deal, for example, that the Fuel won the first game against, I think it was Dynasty, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would go for it. No, you go first.
I think that Seoul and Dallas really, that one kind of excited me because I had that match being pretty close. Especially the Anubis match was crazy insane. But the way that Dallas really kind of tried to change up what they were doing for a long time and are trying to look ahead maybe was a theme throughout their entire matches, but the Seoul Dallas game was definitely one that surprised me, but I still kind of had them playing a little bit close. So I think that Seoul just needed to get the first one, get the mulligan out of the way, and then I think they did really well, but I think Monte can break that down a little bit further.
Well, what I think is interesting is so the Korean teams, we saw a couple losses on Junkertown, and I don't think it's necessarily Junkertown. I think it's actually just the first match of the series. I think it's just the first game is really the crux of it, because even though they're losing maps, it's like what we saw in that series was Seoul, and this is obviously, we talk about any Korean team in any game and what have their strengths been. It's been adaptation and ability to change strategically on the fly. And what happened is they come into the Dallas Fuel game. Okay, they lose the first map, but you can see them on Anubis adapting to the triple tank Widowmaker strategy that Fuel is running over time, and they're trying different things. First they've got this scenario, this strategy where they do a slow push into the Orisa Widowmaker, and then all of a sudden Seoul changes their next defense. It all of a sudden is a dive composition that Seoul's running, and they just run straight into the point. And then what you see is they switch back to the Widowmaker strategy, but they change their positioning so they have a crossfire over the point. And so you see Seoul adapting. And also teams like when we saw London, they lost their first Junkertown map as well. So I think it's mostly just you're seeing the Korean team's strengths be in that adaptation and not necessarily, I think that's what we're seeing overall. So I'm not really surprised. We knew coming in that there were some great Western teams in this league. So I don't think it's, Seoul or Spitfire lost Dorado to Florida. Yes. Excuse me, I made a mistake there. But
I think Winston's Lab actually did a interview with Nuss, the London support, I think the Mercy player, and he talks about how they really, it seems like they struggle on the first map, and they just need to really kind of get the machine kind of churning, get the gears going, and then they just snowball. The rest of the three games look very different from the very first game that they play. So I think that's an interesting kind of a concept coming into some of these Korean games.
Yeah, I think it's right too, and I think that also when we look at Dallas in particular, they have been competitive on their first couple of maps, and yeah, they were pretty competitive. They were competitive on Numbani. Actually, they probably could have won Numbani, honestly, against Seoul, and pushed it to the tiebreaker. But the control has been really shaky, and at the end of their Valiant match, they really did look like mentally defeated. As soon as like Seoul or Soon like pushed that cart in, I was just like, okay, they're done. Like,
that's one of those things that's just gonna tilt you out. Not only tilt you off the face of the earth, but it breaks you like emotionally and mentally on stage in front of the crowd. Like that's, it's over at that point. Yeah. So
okay. I don't know. Like we'll get into Dallas, I think, in a little bit. As for New York, so they lost an assault map, interestingly, against Boston, and then against Houston they lost Junkertown. So it's like another Junkertown defeat. So we've had three first map defeats over the course of the initial matches from the Korean teams. And New York, to me, is probably the worst currently of the Korean teams. They're the most fun to watch. So like paradoxically for me, like I love watching this team because it's like so crazy, their individual skill, but they don't have the same level of team coordination or ult management that we see from the other Korean rosters. So I think they're more likely to drop maps, but we've seen them, and also they haven't had a great test, right? They played Houston and Boston. It's not like they've played any of the other top teams yet. So I'm most worried about New York, but Seoul, not really concerned. Very impressive performance, even against the Gladiators when they were running Kuki and like Wikid and Bunny. So I think at least the top two, London and Seoul, are going to be fine. Hard to lose with Prophet and Birdring together. Finally, New York may take a little more time to kick into gear. But I'm not too worried. In fact, I think it's good. Like, obviously, we want closer matches between Korea and the West.
For sure.
What did you think then? Obviously, everyone remembers the games that Pine played, because he popped off in them massively. But obviously, he's just being used as a sub. And at the moment, only being brought in for like one map in a series. Right? Is that justified? Should he not just be a starter and then see how it goes and then kind of have more of a hard starter sub scenario as opposed to mixing it up?
So here's the thing. Like, he plays long range hit scan well. He's a McCree player. He is a Widowmaker player. But if you think about Sebyolbi's hero pool, he can play both of those heroes as well. And he may not be able to play them at the level of Pine, but he can play Tracer, which Pine can't, and is a much more stable hero in the current meta. I think that Pine becomes a starter instead of Sebyolbi if the meta swaps away from Tracer. But Libero is just has a much bigger hero pool than either of those players. You need him on a lot of these other maps. However, when you have control maps, and it's also the style too, because he will just pop off and 1v6 a team, and he can just sort of deathmatch an enemy team. Doesn't require like a lot of strategy. It's just playing around your teammates' positioning. It's not about setting up for an attack or setting up for a defense and like playing a zone. He's just there like clicking heads basically on Ilios. And if you want to use him for that on control, and that's his strength, and he can just pop off and win you control every time, then cool. But I don't see there's a reason, unless for some, like, you really wanted to play Tracer McCree or Tracer Widow or Widow McCree for an entire map, why they would put him on an escort or an assault.
I think that when it comes to Ilios, which I think both of their control maps were drawn to be Ilios, I think that it lends itself to his hero pool because you have Ruins, which is a great Widow map. Well and Lighthouse aren't necessarily too bad for McCree because it is, you do see a little bit of Farah come out there. So I think that McCree is becoming like a very safe standard pick, and you're playing on land, which just kind of makes McCree that much better. The hit registrations probably, I would wager, I haven't played it myself, but I would wager that it's probably much better than it. Yeah, I've heard a lot of pros talk about how it's very different even from a Tracer perspective. So I can't imagine that Widow, McCree, even Soldier become that much better. So it really did lend itself to Pine's hero pool. Whether or not we see him, like Monty said, come out in the future more often, it depends on the meta. We have the new patch coming out with the Mercy nerfs and the changes, I should say. So we'll see. It'll be interesting.
I also, if you look at Ilios, I agree with what Volamel is saying. Ruins, obviously very famous for Widow, but if you look at it's great for McCree, because I was talking to Uber about this, who plays a lot of McCree, and the damage fallout for McCree is 20 meters, which is basically the size of the point. So you can always shoot across the point. It's not a great map for Tracer versus McCree because if you are on the point, you have to go through the chokes around the well and you're just going to get flashbanged. So you can't contest point very easily against McCree. Lighthouse obviously is another situation where it's a very small area for Tracer to go in to get flashbanged. So these are just great maps for his pool. Whether his performance is going to continue, I don't know, but it's really fucking fun to watch him play right now.
Because one of the things when I watched the 3 Korean teams play is I would agree, the New York Excelsior looked very, very exciting. But I think part of it was you can tell this is the team that had the core of LW Blue because they just looked like a team of really good individuals. They didn't really have a whole lot of coordination. And so that's going to mean that when the player goes off, it looks amazing. But I do want to see, for example, this week actually is when they're playing Valiant, for example. I want to see when they play Dallas Fuel because I feel like these teams will have a shot against that Korean team because of that reason. You can maybe match them in terms of player strength.
So actually, I think Valiant is going to beat New York this week. I actually believe that.
I think I have them at like 3-2 Valiant.
Yeah, that's my prediction. That's definitely my prediction as well. I think Valiant right now are looking like a more cohesive team. And I was really worried about how some of those matches were with New York, especially when Jonak and Arc, as good as Jonak is at dealing damage, his coordination with his transcendence with the rest of his team, and especially even with Arc, is sort of worrying. A little bit. And so I need to see a lot more, I think, from them in order to push them over the top. And I also think that it's going to be a lot harder for them to pop off when Soon is playing so well right now. And even Silk Thread and Agilities have both been having great games. So I think that right now, at least, Valiant is more coordinated, and I definitely think that they're going to win.
I think that the way that LA is going to pressure them, it is really going to test them, and players like Pine, players like SABLB won't have the immense room that they've had in the past to work with. So you're going to see them really tested, and I think that LA probably, like you said, probably has the answer. Well,
it's also, so here's the other factor. It's 2 maps that New York has lost to start things out, Junker Down and Horizon. So they can look back and say, okay, how did you lose this? Then you have Oasis as control. So what are you going to do? Can you play Pine on Oasis? Does he have to play with Libero to play Pharah? Are you not playing a Pharah? These are all really big questions that we're going to have answered. And Numbani too, that's another map that we could see Pharah play on. But I'm most worried about the first 3 maps. I think New York can hold their own on Numbani for the most part, but with a couple of maps they've already lost, and then this Oasis map that I don't think is as good for them as Ilios if they want to use Pine. It's much more in question.
Okay, and then Valiant actually has a very tough schedule because they play New York Excelsior and London Spitfire. So
yep.
Presumably we will know after this week whether they are going to be a team that can challenge for the number 1 spot.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think they've just gotten like a good early start, or is this team going to actually, when the others are all at top peak, do you think they're better than people expected?
Who, London?
No, the Valiant team.
Oh, Valiant. It is possible that they have just had like a very lackadaisical schedule coming into the first week.
Hey, they did play Dallas, so I mean, shock.
That's true.
But they did have a convincing win against Dallas. That's true.
That's the one thing that kind of did worry me, was that it just seemed like LA took the snowball and not rolled over Dallas, because the maps were all pretty close, but it seemed like each loss definitely seemed like it impacted them a little bit more than what it usually did, especially versus their team in the past. But we'll see. I think Silk Thread has a lot of potential coming in with the projectile play. I think he and Agilities overlap a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see how he develops in the future. I want to see him come towards the end of stage 1 and see what, compare and contrast.
Yeah, I also think that the Valiant roster overall, with Envy's development as a player and him playing significantly better now, Fate and Kareev, so the Korean players are playing at a very high level. They add Soon and Unko. So you have Kareev and Unko, fantastic support line. Envy and Fate are playing well together. Soon's been popping off. And so it's mostly been a question of, in their projectile / secondary DPS position, are agilities and Silk Thread the long-term solutions. In their first couple of games, they looked solid. Like they weren't blowing my mind in any way, although I think agilities, like he did pretty well in the Roadhog, but they weren't, you know, it wasn't like a star level performance. So I guess the question is, are they going to develop into that level of performance and that level of versatility, or is it possible for Valiant to pick up another DPS player who is really going to like push them to the next level?
Maybe French guy, maybe also in the same team, same as he had before.
No, he doesn't play the projectile heroes, unfortunately. Like, I do think it'd be interesting to add him as a soldier player, but I don't think he's the right player for the. Or actually, he does play Pharah. I mean, he did play a sick Pharah at the World Cup, but I'm not sure if AKM is exactly the right player that you want for this. Like, you know, if I could put a different player in here, if I could put Libero in this roster, if I could put Tavik in this roster, I'd be much more interested. And I think that's where you would find that very versatile style of projectile player.
So not to intrude, but I think another player that definitely is on the radar for a lot of teams, Mangachu. He's always been known to be kind of the wonky, kind of crazy pick. Why not slot him in?
I mean, he would definitely add some weird shit to that team. I'm not sure he's the guy I want as a star player.
Definitely not.
More as a supportive role, but yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the teams who, as we cited, started with 2 losses is the Dallas Fuel, who obviously, I actually noticed most people's power rankings had them as the team below the Koreans. It was between Valiant and Dallas, and actually a lot of people opted for Dallas because of the history. Now, their problem was they had not exactly an easy schedule first week. They had Seoul Dynasty and they had Valiant. This week, okay, they get Outlaws, who, you know, isn't terrible, but is middle of the pack-ish. But then they're going to have London Spitfire. So Dallas gets a very tough opening couple of weeks. What do you think what's the worrying sign about the Dallas Fuel team? Because it's okay to lose to some of the teams they've lost to, but they are supposed to be a team that contends for the top spots. So you got to win eventually against some of the best teams.
I think that effect has looked really good on the Widow, but I think that going forward with the decline in Tracer picks, that I think he's still trying to find his footing and exactly where they want to, the Dallas as a team as a whole, trying to find out what kind of identity they want to run, because you look at their compositions that they picked, you know, on Lunar Colony Point A, they run quad tank and running all kinds of crazy strategies. So I think that they're trying to figure out where they want to go next, and maybe you're looking ahead to a little too early and kind of not sacrificing these early few weeks, but they're definitely playing with some interesting ideas and trying to find where his position in the team is going to be in the future, because it does seem like Tracer's falling off a little bit in terms of pick rate.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Effect, obviously he can play a lot of stuff besides the Widow, the Zarya. I mean, he's just an impressive all around player, and he's the backbone really of this Dallas team right now. I think their biggest problem is that honestly they still can't play dive. They have no standard composition to reset to. They don't, so they can play these cool strategies. We can see them play triple tank Widow slow push on Anubis. We can see them play Lucio's speed boost quad tank, which is super cool to watch. And I like that they have these picks, and these compositions have been successful. The biggest problem for me is so they work against the best teams at the start, but then both Valiant and Dynasty adapted to them. And then there wasn't anything else that they could do. They could play the same composition on that map in different ways, as in they changed their tactics, how they were approaching the point, their positioning, the use of their abilities, but they didn't change the composition that much. And so there doesn't seem like there's some sort of default catch-all composition that for any map they can go back to, which is what Tracer, Genji, Winston, Diva, Dive is. This is why people use it, is because it is an effective composition in basically any situation, and it's a look that you can show people. And when we've seen them, the biggest problem, obviously, is that they can't use Genji properly. And even though it looks like they're trying to play the Genji more, obviously against Valiant, we saw Seagull pull out the Genji. His Genji was really underwhelming. Like his Dragon Blades were quite poor. It looks like he's under practiced on the Genji, or at least the team is under practiced in playing with the Genji. It's often hard to tell because somebody's like, "Hey, Seagull, pull your Dragon Blade," and then he's like, "Okay," and he's like, "Oh, there's nobody around me. Yeah, exactly. I thought you were telling me to do that because there was somebody here." You never know the actual cause of that, but they've got to figure that out. And I don't know if dive is the answer for them, but there has to be some sort of stable composition that works in any situation that they can sort of dial back to, because if they're not threatening that, it gives the other team so much time to adapt, because it's like, oh, well, we lost that round, we'll just push against them, we'll win this next one, we'll try something else because we know what's coming.
Right.
And I think that's been their biggest problem right now.
Do you think that's more, not to throw any shade by any means, but do you think the kind of diagnosis there is more that they can't necessarily play Genji, or is it something like communication issues? Like there's not like a clear caller on that team, do you think?
Well, I think it depends on who's in the roster as to who's calling, because players like Custa and XQC tend to be much, and Taimu tend to be more vocal. So I think it just changes depending on who's in there, which might fuck with them, obviously. If from map to map, they're not necessarily getting the same kind of or same amount of information. Right. But I think every team has to work on that. The most important thing is that your comms are consistent as you switch out players, as much as they can be, at least.
Gotcha.
Okay, so actually that's a topic we could talk about then, because a lot of teams did use the substitutions, and they used them on specific maps or against a certain opponent. They'd start with one look and then change it up. Now, in this scenario, do you think it is it like a global meta in Overwatch League that people are just using different lineups for different maps or different map types?
I think it's too easy to say, or too early to say right now. Like, it's really difficult to tell even. So, for example, it just sort of depends team by team. So with Seoul, we know they use Fleta, Jaehong, Toby, and Zunba, and then they've been switching out the second DPS and the tank. We don't really know, because we've only seen 2 matches, why they're doing it that way. I can say, like, different teams have different strategies for those swaps. For example, Jaehong and Toby are always going to be there because they're the support players on that roster, but also because they're the shot callers. And so that, I think that minimizes the room for error when you swap out those other players, is to maintain your shot calling core and then expect the people who come into the team to react to the shot calling in the same way, if that makes sense. You know what I'm talking about?
Okay.
But other teams, obviously, especially Dallas, are like swapping out their shot callers.
Right.
So
it's a little strange. One other thing to kind of double back on the Seoul topic, we did see Kuki come in, and in an interview, they did talk about how he's like this more vocal presence on Winston, where they want to keep Miro being like the kind of silent fragger as he tends to be. Do you think that that's kind of the same topic, where, you know, you still do have your core in Jaehong and Toby, but then you're adding in Kuki? Do you think that that's going to elevate them to another level, or do you think that's just an added bonus?
I don't think I've seen enough Kuki yet to know if he's like comparable to Miro. I don't think either Miro or Kuki are competing for title of best main tank in this league, and I don't think they will. So yeah, I think we'll just have to wait and see. That's why it's just so early in the season. It's hard. I think it's hard for anybody to say definitively. Even the teams themselves. The teams don't know either, by the way. Obviously, they're still like trying to figure things the fuck out.
Okay, because the other Korean team, London Spitfire, the problem is, like, you could have like blinked and just missed this team playing, because it's like they just came in, they just boringly just beat the 2 teams they played. They didn't play the best teams. They played Fusion and Mayhem. And obviously, it wasn't exactly a very good week for Mayhem. What do you think of the London Spitfire so far?
Solid. I think that, like the interview with Nuths had talked about, they do seem to really need to get going on stage to kind of get in the groove. You know, cut the chatter, just focus on the game. We do see Birdring and Prophet just go off and go crazy. The interesting thing for me with London was the tank choices, because it's an odd absence of Fissure, and Gesture looks good. The preseason for him was a little shaky for me, especially on Junkertown, but I think that that's more of a an adjustment thing for a lot of teams. I think everybody's still trying to figure out how exactly that map's going to be played. But overall, I think that they're maybe not clearly number 2, but they definitely have the pieces and the potential to be a very consistent number 2 and maybe even the first in the power rankings, that is.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, because you can't underestimate the depth of the talent. And I think that what they did in this week was really telling about their mindset in the first week of play, which is that they didn't vary their roster at all, despite having all of this depth. We see them come in with Gesture and Fury, and then Prophet, Birdring, Bedosin, and Nuss. So this is a combination of Kongdu players, GC Busan players, Meta Athena players, Team Liquid. Like, there are all these guys that are coming together on this roster. And remember, Bedosin wasn't even there for the preseason, so he's a newer addition to what we've seen from this team. But they don't vary it, right? They said, okay, we have something stable that's good right now. And like, I've been bummed out about not seeing Fisher. Rascal is definitely a player who I think they will use as sort of the Pine of London, but they won't use him on Control. They'll use him on like Assault, because if we remember in the preseason when he was playing May on Horizon, like he plays May, Sombra, like a bunch of weird heroes that they'll have specific strategies for. But unlike Pine, who's going to be that guy who's like death matching and popping off, Rascal's going to be that guy that enables you to play set strategies on certain maps. So I think we will see definitely more of Rascal, but I think I think London is slowly figuring out what the character of their team is. And they're doing that by running a consistent roster right now to see what the results are. And then they'll start to slowly introduce more variables down the line. But I think it's smart when you have a couple of weak opponents in the first week, just try and send out a solid roster consistently and then expand from there.
Does it surprise you at all that they wanted to mix the rosters, or did you think that they were just going to run Kongdu and GC Busan cutting?
No, because I talked to the coaches and they told me they weren't going to do that. So, for the preseason, they were like, we want to do that because these teams haven't had a chance to play together. Even they went back sort of on their word by the second day after the GC Busan losses. And then it seems to me like they've just been mixing things up. I'm grateful we get to see Prophet and Birdring play on the same roster. That's pretty sick. So, and I do think they'll be the core moving forward. So I'm excited to see what they do. I don't think that this first week is indicative of how dynamic they're going to be in terms of their roster substitutions. I think it was trying to get 12 guys to work together, and that's just going to take some time.
Well, this week they play Dallas Fuel and the LA Valiant. So
yeah, they got some much harder matches
with the Valiant team.
I think they'll win. I think they'll beat Valiant. I think Valiant can't. It's going to be difficult for them to prepare for two very hard opponents in 1 week. And they only have 2 maps of overlap in Horizon and Oasis. So I think that they'll probably, if I were them, I'd be putting most of my prep time into New York because I think I have a better chance of beating them. And I think that they're more predictable because, again, London has 12 players and you haven't seen half of them play in the opening week. So I feel much more confident about trying to take on New York. So I would be gunning for them. And I think London just has better fundamentals. And I think that it's going to be really hard, as well as Silk Thread has been doing, and Agilities. There's a big mismatch in the DPS. They're like, nobody has better DPS in this league than Prophet and Birdring.
There's also the issue that if you were going to play those two teams, you'd probably want to play it the other way around, because 2 days later after you play the New York Excelsior, the London team is watching all that. They've seen everything you've done, and now you're going to play them. So you probably want it the other way around. If anything.
Well, I think you want it this way, because you don't want New York, the team that you're most likely to beat, to have seen a couple of your maps beforehand, right? And be like, let's take a look at those.
I mean, that's a Monty way of thinking, because in your mind, you're accepting that you're going to lose one of the games.
Yeah, I am. Yes,
they want to believe they could win both.
I'm a realist. What can I say?
Okay. What do you think, Volamel? Can Valiant beat London Spitfire?
It's interesting because the more I look at these maps, I'm not entirely too sure exactly what starting roster they're going to run come game 2 and game 3. So Lunar Colony and Oasis. I think both of those maps, especially for London, they can bring out Rascal and he can do something. I think we've seen him obviously on May on Lunar Colony, but it's possible that they bring him out for Oasis as well and run him on Sombra. And then maybe switch him off for game 1 and game 4. When it comes to LA, I do like their kind of concepts with Junkrat kind of abusing the tight choke points when you attack on or defending an attack on Dorado. I don't want to discount LA, but I think they could take game 1 just because if the kind of trend with London taking a bit to kind of get used to this, get on stage and get used to the game, or not get used to, but get warmed up. So they maybe take game 1, game 2, and game 3. I have to go with London, and then game 4. I think Eichenwald tends to be more of a kind of a balanced map when it comes to just compositions overall. So I don't think you'll see anything crazy come out of either of these teams. I think it's just going to be pretty straight and narrow. Maybe a Farah, maybe a Sombra, but I highly doubt it. So I think London probably takes that just purely based on like stats or like a stat page, just pure mechanics in that sense.
Okay. So one team that I found, I have to say, like a little bit underwhelming was the Boston Uprising team, because everyone got so hyped when they won that map against New York Excelsior. But if you remember how the game ended, though, Monty, I think, if I'm right, that was the game where when they were playing, I think it was Numbani, right? Like, the New York team had that like epic hold where the payload was like right on the edge, and they were like just holding it the whole time, right, for like 30 seconds. And then when they just swapped to attack, they just like cruise straight in there, like, yeah, that's done. That's already done. And it's like, well, like what's mad is to a fan, you might be like, oh, but it was so close to being one each. It's like, no, if anything, that was like, they sort of showed that like we can sort of style on you, and then when we do it, we just walk in there and win easily, So here's the thing. Obviously, the Boston team did have some positives. Admittedly, their other win was against Florida, who clearly had massive issues of their own. So what's the take on Boston? Because obviously they were the team that got trashed when everyone saw the roster. Then everyone talked them up from the scrims and said they were going to be good. Where did they finish up for you, Monty?
I think everybody thinks they're doing better than when the roster was announced we expected. I think that's really safe to say. I don't think their stock has risen very much from the preseason at all. Maybe slightly, but I think optimistically this team is still like 6th to 9th place. Maybe they can squeak into the playoffs, right? They might even be better than Houston right now. I think that Dream Casper has been a very interesting player to watch. He played 9 different heroes at a pretty high level. So for me, he's intriguing on his own because I think he might be like actually a very good player in the making, which nobody could have really expected. So that like for me, like he and Gamsu are probably like the best performing players on this roster, but they seem relatively well balanced overall. And I think they'll just be a pretty middle of the pack team. They'll take some maps here and there from teams like New York, but they'll also get smashed on the other ones.
Now, I caught bits and pieces of this game, but I know that one of your kind of diagnoses for Boston was that they were very kind of one path centric, if you understand what I'm saying. Like they only had like one strategy. Do you think that was improved upon coming into week 1? Okay. I
do, actually. I do. So they did look slightly more dynamic. I'm going to go back and watch some more of their games again before this week because I do want to see that. And revisit it and review it. But I do think my initial, when watching them, I didn't feel like they were quite as static in their approaches as they were previously.
Good.
Okay. Right. There's only one way to ask this question. Right. On a scale of 0 to dead, what level of suicide watch should Florida Mayhem be on?
Well, they have the midseason, right? Like they can always just get more players if that's the actual problem. I don't know how to even.
If the solution is we need more players after week 1, I think that is somewhat indicative in itself.
No, Thorin. They needed more players after the preseason.
Sure.
So not after week 1, before week 1, they needed more players. Like that was very clear. When you come into the preseason and you have an established roster and you have an established synergy and you just play second at European contenders and you went 27-2 online in European contenders, and then all of a sudden you're getting smashed. Like that's just horrible. Like there's no recourse from that, right? Certainly the meta is bad for them. I mean, clearly we can say the Mercy meta is not good for the Mayhem, but at the same time, even if it does change, it's also going to improve for other teams like Seoul will be doing even better than they are right now. So I think they need to be very concerned. At least there's a signing period where they can add some depth to this roster and get new players. I don't know why they didn't do it previously. We did talk in our last episode about sometimes as an owner, you do have to sort of let the players fail themselves so that they realize that changes need to be made. Might be that scenario. Yeah, but needs a lot of help. What do you think
they lack as a team at the moment? Because the thing is, I have to say, even in terms of like everything, body language, the things they were saying, it seemed like a team that themselves didn't have any confidence.
They're, like I said, like they're so bizarre because the heroes that Logix does play, and a lot of people tend to harp on him because, you know, this whole narrative of him kind of choking out lane, which I can see a little bit of, but I don't think it's necessarily he's the crux of their problems.
He does look better. He did look better this week compared to contenders playoffs, and preseason.
But with like the decline of Tracer, I think he does play a mean Widow. I just don't know exactly. Yeah, sure. That team in general, I really have to go back and look at where the disconnect is. Is it a communication thing? Are they kind of jumbled? They're a very odd team to kind of look at.
I think it's really hard for them to win fights because they get picked off a lot. And I think Zebasai, he's not really suited for the Mercy, and there's a lot of positional errors that they make. They don't, like, it's Swoosh getting picked off or it's Zebasai getting picked off. I really like. There's always been something about this roster that didn't gel. You know, ever since the rogue trade happened with Misfits, this roster, and they keep swapping all these roles. They've never been able to really figure out a functional synergy. Zupe, I also find underwhelming on non-Ana heroes. So there's another, I think their support line is a problem overall. And again, that can be improved with the change in the meta, but you need to have more players to be less meta reliant. I think Tavik isn't performing up to the standard that we expect of him either. So it's really hard. Like, I think they need another off tank, because Manitin is a good road dog and a decent diva, but he's not at the same level as other diva players, in my opinion. I think they need new supports for this meta, or they're just going to try and wait it out. But having some more options, I think, would be nice for them. I think Zebasai, who is the main strategist, along with Mineral, their coach of the team, it might be time for Zebasai to go ahead and take a coaching role instead of a playing role, and try and lead the team that way instead. But something's got to give here, obviously, and I think that's where you start.
Because if you had a team that was amazing, like if you had just had the Kongdu or the GC Busan team and you just ran that 6-man line, okay, I could see a logic behind it. But this was a team where actually the fact that they had no one they could substitute, I think probably hurts even more. Because now if everyone's playing like shit, you can't even think, well, I might get taken out, or we can bring someone else in. It's just like, well, we're stuck with this, so we're trapped in here with everyone else. So
yeah, basically.
what are we doing now?
The only thing I can think of when it comes to that specific topic is that they thought they could do it themselves. I mean, a lot of these players do come from many different roles in the past. They think that they could maybe possibly swap to different roles. Tvik plays pretty much everything. Swoosh has played DPS in the past. Manaten's, has had his fair share of triple DPS play. So maybe they thought that they had a wide enough hero pool that they could pull it off. But maybe, like Monty said, you just kind of have to fail to learn how to succeed in the future.
Well, it's also a lot of these guys come from backgrounds in other games, and they've never encountered this level of professionalism before, even in Overwatch, or this level of versatility or infrastructure from the teams. And I think Mayhem has lagged behind when it comes to providing a support staff. The org itself is what I'm saying, has lagged behind providing a support staff and providing the proper infrastructure for these players. So that's something they really need to get on as well. But everything about this Florida Mayhem organization and roster itself needs to be expanded very seriously. So I think when you look at the pieces, you're not upset with Tvik or Logix or Manitin or Zupe in the right meta. Or even Swoosh, he's had some good play at times on Winston. I don't think he's not up there. He's not going to win best tank in Overwatch League, but he's serviceable. But there's something about the synergy that's not working. And so whether it's more analysts and coaches that need to come in order to fix this team, whether it's a strong mind like Zebasai taking a step back out of the starting roster and into a coaching position, these are all options for them to explore. So I think this is not like, I'm not going to say scrap this entire team, fire everybody, rebuild from nothing. I don't think you do that. That's what you do to the Shanghai Dragons.
No, Monty. Of course, we wouldn't suggest that the Florida Mayhem should blow it all up just because they're feeling the heat and looking for a little bit of that magic.
Very good. Very good. It's not bad.
That's my audition to be on the analyst desk. There we go.
Pretty good shit.
Okay.
But I think that this is salvageable. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to salvage it.
Well, also, I mean, this is where, I know I'm not usually known as the eternal optimist, Monty, but this is where I would actually be able to find that silver lining for these guys. I'd say to them, listen, there's a lot of other kind of wonky teams in the league as well. Have you seen, the Fusion team, the Shock team? We got chances still, guys. It's not over yet. And also there's no relegation, so again, any more silver linings? Yeah. So, okay, let's switch to another team then. So a team that I found a little bit underwhelming was the Houston team, because on the one hand, some of their players look good and they certainly seem like a team who's going all in, etc. But I thought the Fusion game, that should have been more winnable. I actually expected them to win that. I thought they would be the team just behind kind of the Valiants and the Fuels of the world in terms of the Western team. So what started wrong for Houston at least, or what are the flaws here?
It seems like the one big thing that really was interesting to me was their control maps, and they kept trying to put in Clockwork, and it just doesn't seem like it's working. I don't want to say anything more than that, but
in Houston, they played on Oasis. Clockwork had 2 eliminations and 6 deaths across the entire map of Oasis. And to me, that's not even like Clockwork is a bad player. There is some fundamental stylistic difference, because how these compositions that they're running are supposed to work. Tracer will clean up kills, right? So there must, when a professional Tracer does that badly, it's not just that the Tracer isn't playing well, it's that some other aspect of their teamwork is not allowing the Tracer to do the Tracer's job. Either they're not engaging right to chunk people so Tracer can kill them. They're not distracting well enough so the Tracer can get a flank. There's no game plan for the Tracer to get a flank. A backline long-range DPS like a Pharah or a Junkrat isn't doing enough damage for the Tracer to clean up, or isn't communicating that the Tracer needs to be in a specific position. This was such a bad performance that it's not just Clockwork's fault. There's obviously a much bigger fundamental issue here.
Definitely. When it comes to, when I was looking at some of the stats, and a big thing was that Jake had some solid performances, but then he tended to die a lot. So do you think that maybe not funneling or having a one-track mind in that sense, but do you think they need to play maybe a little bit more around Jake and Linkser a little bit more and just keeping with that lineup? Or do you think that they just need to open up their threats a little bit wider?
I think there's like a lot of issues. So I think Jake has been, his performance outside of his Junkrat performance has been relatively underwhelming. His Pharah play against Philly was like really not great either. So he got basically wrecked by Shadowburn, which again doesn't really help out with his other DPS. I think their tank line is doing well. I think Muma and Coolmat are doing all right. I think the support line is strong. I think that there just is this weird thing that's happening with the DPS. So when we look at Fuel, Fuel and Houston actually have quite similar problems in that they can't play dive. Houston can't play dive because they don't have a tracer. And if you want to play Linkser on tracer, well, all of a sudden you're sort of locked into like tracer Junkrat to even be a remote threat, which is super weird. So Linkser is forced to flex to provide them with different strategies that they're actually capable of running. So that's been like odd. To say the least. And Fuel, they can't play the Genji, right? So then they're dealing with the situation where they can't run the Genji part of the dive, and Houston can't run the Tracer part of the dive, at least not effectively. So with this team, Sideshow also has been talking about this, I know, but it's like when they substitute somebody in, you know exactly what they're going to be doing. There's no mystery because it's like they have a bunch of players that are good at one hero or two heroes. So there is no mystery about what they're doing with their roster, right? It's so surviving in that scenario where your strategies become so transparent is just, I think it's just brutal. Like, if Coolmat's playing, they're running D.Va. If Spree comes in, guess what? You're running Zarya. Like, it's not a mystery. It's not a mystery at all.
So are they a bit one-dimensional when the team is in the server then?
Yeah, they're not like you look at this team and you say, oh, this team on paper. Oh, look, all these players play different things. But like you say, when they submit the roster, when the other team's like, oh, this is who they're playing, it's like we know exactly what they're doing, right? Yeah. There's no mystery. At least with Dallas, there's a mystery because they play such weird, crazy strategies, and it's like they practice their crazy strategies, so they have an edge. Like they have like an advantage of you have to figure us out. Houston Outlaws plays very standard, except they're limited because they can't change in the server to those different strategies. And when they try, like Jake does badly, I don't know why you would ever sub Linkser out at this point in time. They need to sign. They need to sign like a good tracer player to complement him and then swap or they need to fix the issues that they're having, whatever problems they're having with Clockwork right now, because Clockwork, like the DPS players just don't seem to work together. And Jake and Linkser work together, but they don't have a lot of variance in terms of the like DPS packages that you can create.
It's quite weird that both the Fuel and the Outlaws teams can't play dive. I want someone to make a Photoshop. Remember that movie, White Men Can't Jump? It's going to be Texans Can't Dive.
There we go.
And I need a picture of like Taimu and Linkser. We'll just go with two good players, but they're just that they can't dive. And then if you can do something creative with the tagline, go for it.
I'm sure we'll get it.
Like maybe the tagline can be something like "It's hard to dive when things are bigger" or something like that. Isn't that the thing they always say about Texas? I don't know how you'd work it. You'd have to work something along those lines. Things are just bigger down there. Okay, come on then, Volamel.
When it comes to Houston, Monty, do you think that maybe possibly putting Mendo in that tracer role, maybe putting him on more of an aggressive role and just?
Well, if I were Houston right now, I would be trying Mendo because like after week 1, I'd be like, well, fuck it. Let's see what you can do, Mendo. It's one of those situations where you're like, I don't know if we're going to be able to survive like this up until we can make some roster changes or add some new players in. So we might as well see what we've got on the bench, right? It's it's early in the season, of course. You don't need to necessarily throw away your season or default to that. But like at this point, I'm like, well, let's see what the young rookie draft pick can do because. Might as well give him some experience and see if he can work some magic. Absolutely. I think you definitely put him in this week.
Okay. Right. So the team that beat them in the game, I said I thought the Outlaws was going to win, was the Philadelphia Fusion, who, I think they were the team that, the other game they played was London Spitfire. So fair enough. You don't really expect them to win that one. Right. here's the scenario. Here's how I would set it up. Okay, so Volamel, when Fusion won that game against Houston, what everyone did was they all took the glass half full approach. They were all like, wow, what a great game. They're better than I thought they would be. But I even said to Monte, like the second after that, when I saw him, I said, I think a little bit of Houston not being as good, a little of column A, a little of column B. Like that's kind of how I'd make that ingredient list, So what do you actually make of the Fusion team then? Because obviously they've played a very, very tough opponent, and then they've played one that's more of a middling opponent.
I think that mechanically they have a disgusting core. I mean, Carpe, Shadowburn, Poco really stood out to me as being insane with his diva bombs. Like he just threw them and they just got kills. And at that point, it's just like you're consistent enough that it's just not a random chance. Like you're actually, it seems like he's the kid that goes in the server and practices.
You got 17 self-destruct kills. Like I actually have some stats that were provided from Captain Planet, because he's writing an article for the site about sort of the craziest outlier stats. So we could just put numbers on this. I can tell you 17 self-destruct kills in a match, including 7. So not even overall. It's just one match.
What's like a sort of a reference number? What would you expect a good player to have?
Okay, we'll get there. 7 in a single game on Eichenwald. So his self-destruct kills, he was getting 2.18 per 10 minutes. No other Diva player had more than 1.15 for 10 minutes. So basically, he was a 1 kill, self-destruct kill per 10 minutes up, nearly double is the answer. So that's like wacky good. So yes, he got the 17 kills over the Outlaws. But yes, it's not only total absolute, which of course in a 5-map series, and the way we're doing Overwatch stats these days is mostly per 10 minutes or per minute. Okay. So that's the real stat though, is 2.18 per 10 minutes as opposed to 1.15. So he was significantly better at getting self-destruct kills.
And what does that change in a game if your Diva can do that?
I think it adds just another threat. Divas all tends to be a little bit underwhelming and used to kind of create, as niche or as cliche as it is to say, it does create a lot of space, getting people off of points, getting people off of payloads. But they're using this aggressively to get picks, which is very kind of interesting and strange, but they also can create a ton of space with it as well. So it's very versatile, and they actually have a new threat coming from the sub-tank role where not necessarily a lot of people are being able to get picks in that role.
And I think what's so interesting about watching the Fusion early is that we can talk about Poco in the self-destructs, but one of the things that's helping him get all these kills is Fraggy ulting people into his ult. So what they do is that they play together very well. So Fraggy will pop the Primal Rage, Poco will throw the mech out, and then Fraggy will sit there and beat people into the self-destruct. So it there were a lot of assists. It was teamwork that was creating this, which I think is cool because we have a very interesting ultra aggressive tank lineup in Philly that already has at least some level of synergy down, and they've got this weird way of playing where they create these big wipes. Like you get 3 kills with a self-destruct and then you're just pushing that payload for a while.
Do you think that kind of turns them into the dark horse of the team where they could just take, a couple maps off of London here or there, maybe taking a win over LA? Do you think that they're going to be the dark horse coming into the latter half of stage 1?
I think that at the very least, we expected them to be good eventually. So the fact that their individual skill was causing them to beat Houston now should be worrying for the other teams, because once this roster actually comes together, I think they're going to be very strong.
Definitely.
Well, and if you look, they've got if you want to be the team that now builds on that, they've got the ideal lineup because they're playing against the San Francisco Shock and the LA Gladiators. So it's not like they're having to play 2 more Korean teams and you have a hard week. In theory, we will see this week how good they're going to be, right? Because if you're going to be a top team, you should be beating those squads.
Definitely. And again,
I think they might still struggle against the Gladiators because against the coordinated play we saw of London, they were not so great. So I think they overwhelmed Houston because they, on an individual level, are just better players than those guys for the most part. It's not like all their players are better than all the other players, but especially the DPSs. Like Carpe and Shadowburn just went crazy on the DPS of the Outlaws. And yes, right now their positions are being punished by good teams like London, but they just have so much brute force on that roster that they can play sort of sloppy and get away with it against the worst teams in the league.
Okay. Right, speaking of the worst teams, can we just get out of the way? This is the weekly 5 minutes about the Shanghai Dragons, where we all pretend to care, and then we give, we're obliged contractually to pretend that this is a real team, and that, representing China is a great honor, right? This team looked fucking garbage. Come on, were there any bright spots?
They are by far the worst team in this league, like by a lot, like a large margin.
They have, it seems like they have, again, it's one of those teams that was kind of thrown together. They don't really have any concrete synergy coming in from, a past team. They have some players here and there, but apart from some saving graces coming from their DPS line, sometimes
I was basically told, correct me if I'm wrong here, Volamel, but first of all, not only was this almost a totally new roster, but they also didn't even actually necessarily pick the best Chinese players. Like you would hope was at least kind of the theme, they just picked players. People implied it was kind of political how the players got picked. So was this kind of like an underwhelming roster even for Chinese players?
I think the number one team coming straight out of China that a lot of people were hoping for, especially when they kind of put up the silhouettes, they're like, oh, let's try and match them up. And a lot of people were disappointed that it wasn't this team Miraculous Youngster that came out of China and kind of went toe-to-toe with some of the kind of tier 2 Korean teams in Nexus Cup and some of the other Chinese team or tournaments. But yeah, I would have to agree that this team isn't even the best teams or the best players in China. I think that hopefully come the midseason, maybe they get something done. But again, it's one of those midseason things.
So basically, this team are just the Florida Mayhem's best friends. They're just like, listen, you're not the worst.
I think Florida will crush these guys, actually, because at least Florida has some sort of, they can at least play dive. Like, there's something that Florida can do well. Florida, they did take a map off the Spitfire. We can't say that that's nothing, right? Yeah. And they were convincing in that map too. So when Florida plays their dive style that may be a little bit outdated, and even if they're not the best at running Mercy, at least they've got something. Like Shanghai Dragons, I don't even know what their best strategy is. Like they were running Moira on open control maps. Like I was like, what are you even doing right now? Nothing you're doing makes any sense. It's not logical. You're not making the plays. Their one bright spot was full holding Horizon against San Francisco, but that was the worst game of Overwatch we've seen this season, where San Francisco just stood there and took a million Junkrat bombs and did nothing. Yeah. This roster is just so puzzling for me. And the worst part about it, by the way, is Miraculous Youngster announced that they're all going to go play PUBG. So now we can't even get those players. Where are these players going to come from in China? I hope they're doing some crazy scouting right now, because something so much has to change. And it sucks. It really sucks, because China, okay, we can say that when Miraculous Youngster played Lunatic High, and they did play well against them, it was with new players, and some of the players weren't playing, and maybe they weren't taking the tournament very seriously, but they were a threat. With all those caveats, and they were at least good enough to be a mid-tier Overwatch League team, I would say. That would be my assessment. But instead, we get this roster, which after a year of tournaments in China and relatively competitive showings, you could have cobbled together a bare minimum 6th through 8th place team, and instead you have a team that looks like such a epically worse roster than any other roster. Just sucks. Just it makes me sad that we couldn't have some real competition from China.
Because obviously they do play Florida Mayhem this week. And with all that you've just said right there, if somehow Florida Mayhem loses that team, all I want you to do is this, Monty, just go up and just whisper to Tavik, a broken man, just say, Thorin says he liked you in the end of 2016. We've got to give him some sort of light in the darkness, because that would be the ultimate iniquity.
There's always hope for Tavik. It's not even if the worst happens, eventually he'll be out of his contract.
Yes, exactly. Either this team gets better or he goes elsewhere. As he definitely has never said to any of his teammates. I don't know why I implied that he would have there. So, no, just internally to himself in the mirror every morning when he wakes up. Right, no, so here's the question then. So one of the things we haven't got to talk about yet is the San Francisco Shock. And they were the team that made Valiant look really good in the first game and then got to play Shanghai Dragons. So I don't know what to make of this team at all, because obviously Valiant was pretty good and the Shanghai Dragons team was so bad that basically I have no reference point to take kind of a point off. But this week they play the Philadelphia Fusion and the Boston Uprising. So presumably, if they are going to be a good team, this is the week we will see it. So what should we expect from the San Francisco Shock?
They're not going to be a good team.
Well, that was the end of that.
Well, all right.
Okay, I took care of that one quickly. Okay. Why is that? They've got some good players, Monty.
Vol, I'll take this one. What do you?
My assessment of San Francisco. They have good pieces. Well, they have some interesting pieces. I think that if we see, this is with the utmost respect to a lot of these players because they are very, very good. But if we look at IDDQD kind of like a budget pine, right? And I say that with the utmost respect. I think that he can come out and possibly help them on control maps. But it looks like their control maps are Oasis. So it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Unlucky draws, guys. Sorry about that.
How does that work, by the way, with what maps get drawn? Is it just purely random?
So there are 8 maps in the pool. Well, there are 9 maps technically because Lijiang is used for tiebreakers, yes. The 3-2, but there's 2 of each map type. And I believe that each team plays a certain amount of each map over the course of the season. Right. So I'm not a terribly big fan of the current system. I will make some content on that in a bit. But I think I like having the more limited map pool so that teams are practicing every single map. But I think that no loser selection, no ability to draft the maps at all is not my favorite way of doing things.
But I mean, to kind of double back on the control point, if we look at Oasis, it tends to be a little bit closer in terms of the choke points when we look at like University. It's similar in a way to Ilios. It's not the best map they could have drawn, but it could be that they still bring out IDDQD. Could see some potential there. But other than that, it's possible.
I think they have to run QD. Like. Yeah. They need to change something. The match against San Francisco was like it was like they were trying these different compositions, but they really hadn't mastered one thing. And I think my pet peeve is like just try and master the one style or strategy. If you are not the best team in the world, don't try and mix things up or change your strategy drastically from game to game. Your players don't have the synergy like Dallas has to like sort of move from wonky strat to wonky strat and execute it actually well on the fly. Right. Just do one thing well. And when we watch them play, they're like, well, we want to do this, but we're not quite sure how we're going to execute it. And if I were them, honestly, maybe you just play a ton of Lucio and just develop your own weird style and just run Dak on that because he hasn't been particularly great on the Mercy, but he certainly has his own unique style with the Lucio. So go with something like that instead. Because I just think they're trying too much all at the same time right now before they really like hit their stride with at least one thing. And that's what I'd like to see from them.
Okay. Do you think that so we have 3 teams so far that are maybe trying some interesting things. They can't fit within the current meta. Do you think that maybe the other composition that a lot of Dallas, Houston, and San Francisco could possibly run, maybe like a triple tank soldier like we saw a couple months back?
I mean, I would like to see some more Yeah, I mean that's definitely a possibility. I'd like to see some more soldier from San Francisco in general, because that's the sort of babyface breakout hero in the first place before he was playing a lot of this other stuff. So maybe you put him back on that. And at least you can look, at the very least, you don't even have to run triple tank soldier. You just run soldier tracer.
Soldier in general, yeah.
Soldier tracer always works. Always works. There's no situation where that composition is going to be truly terrible. Even if it's not ideal, it can work. Yep. So maybe you just go with that instead.
Because I mean, all these teams, each team has like a great soldier. You've got Harry Hook, you've got Jake soldier. You know, while middling, it's still serviceable. Or you put maybe Lynx or a Mendo on it. Like it's possible that's maybe their default, that they just have to continue to practice.
I think Jake's soldier performance at the World Cup was actually quite good. So there's no reason why you can't do that. But for San Francisco, like I don't see how they beat Philadelphia. They just don't have, I think, the necessary individual skill. in order to pull that feat off. I think they can give Boston a run for their money, but I would like to see them calm down with all the different team comps and looks they've been giving it. And I think it's just holding them back because they get confused and can't seem to pull the trigger on a lot of this stuff.
Okay. And is it like, when is it that they can bring in the players that are too young now? Is it
stage 3?
Oh, so fucking ages from now, right?
Yes.
That is for the future and another day. So, okay. I wanted to ask about the LA Gladiators team, because the problem they had was another scenario where it's hard to know what to make of them, because they played the Shanghai Dragons and basically just styled on them. Like the Shaz guy was just shitting on everyone with Zenyatta, and then
they were playing Doomfist.
Who was the guy playing fucking Doomfist? Hydration. Which is not even a hero that anyone plays. So I don't even feel like that was like, oh, you can play that. It's like, yeah, against the Shanghai Dragons. Like, not really in competitive Overwatch, but whatever. And then obviously they played Dynasty, who, I don't blame a team for getting wrecked by them. So Volamel, this is one of those teams where I also, when I looked at this roster, was kind of like, I don't really know what they've gone for here. So what do you make of the Gladiators team? Are there some signs?
I think I definitely shared the same sentiment with you when I looked at the team. I was like, oh, they got some cool pieces. I'm interested to see how maybe this Surefour hydration lineup, and Asher came from Korea, probably one of the more improved players that I've seen kind of travel through the timeline of Overwatch. But so far, they look to be like a solid middle of the pack team. I've kind of got them in Philly kind of being my dark horse. I think that, while they
play Philly this week, so
yeah. So I guess it'll be
they're going to beat them.
I think they'll beat Philly.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think it'll be a I don't even know. I'd have to give that one a little bit more thought. With all the kind of tank synergy and the crazy mechanical skill that were coming from the Philly DPS, I might have to go with them, but I'm really not convinced on either one just yet. I think it could be not a coin flip by any means, but it'll be close, I think.
Do you think that they will actually run Doomfist against anyone else?
Yes.
Will it work?
Yes. Yeah. So the way that Dorado kind of, just to give like a kind of brief analysis, so the choke points that you have to fight into are very, very close, and it kind of favors itself to Doomfist when you're coming into the kind of under the car wash into this weird well area. Each path is very tight, so it's a straight narrow shot for Doomfist to kind of come in and just do what he does best and just melee people. There again, when you're kind of in the mix, you do get this crazy big shield when you do play Doomfist, so he kind of operates as this weird tank DPS hybrid kind of style. So yeah, I think they will actually, and it might actually lend itself to another map as well. I'd have to think about what map that is, but it's possible.
Some of these maps with choke points, as long as your DPS is sort of choking off or zoning off one of the other points, because there's only two, as he's saying, there's only two ways to get into Dorado, is through the choke point into the market and then through the staircase, unless you have Pharah or Genji or sure, some of these other heroes. Yeah. But especially for supports, they have to walk through there, and it's really hard for them to live when they're getting rocket punched and just one shot. Yep. So if you have the main thing about Doomfist is that since his changes, he's very buggy, so he doesn't always register the hit, and most people were not practicing him because it became much more difficult because the hitbox got narrowed on his rocket punch. So these are the factors which caused a lot of players to sort of back off of him. But if you're still a good Doomfist player, you have a tool that nobody else has, and you're going to surprise them, and nobody's going to have practiced against it. Nobody's going to know how to deal with it. So I thought they were playing it very effectively, but they were playing more of a zone defense on that Dorado, where Hydration was sort of covering the main choke, and then Asher was off on the, I believe Asher was playing that map off on the side. Mm-hmm. So I also like this team because even though they have 7 players, they actually do have surprising versatility. Even if you say, okay, well, Bishu's sort of like a diva one trick. Remember, Surefour is a very good Zarya. Remember that when Bishu was sick in the preseason, they were being successful with triple DPS. Shaz and Big Goose are really good support players. So
good.
I mean, that's like probably the best element of the team, right? Is the Shaz and Big Goose combination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So do they have a chance against the New York Excelsior?
I think their teamwork's been good, but I don't think it's not good enough to take down this team. I think Valiant is the one who has the shot there because I think they have higher individual skill and have the coordination. I've appreciated the coordination that we've seen from the Gladiators, but I just don't think they've got what it takes to go to that level. But Fusion, like now having seen this team, if Gladiators can maintain their momentum and if they're not going to get punished eventually by having too few players, which they could obviously also address themselves during the signing period, they like you said, Volamel, they are definitely at this point in time, having seen Houston, I'm much more high on the Gladiators than Houston. So they may be in contention for a sixth place playoff spot, like last tier playoff spot.
Yeah, they're always interesting when it comes to, like you said, like the kind of pocket strategy, and I think it definitely might come out. I think that when it comes to New York and the Gladiators, I think that control map is going to be incredibly entertaining because you're going to have hydration coming out, you're going to have Asher popping off. They might even bring out Pine. I think that's the match to watch if you're showing people Overwatch for the first time, because it's going to be quite entertaining, I think.
I wonder when. Like, here's the thing: if he loves to sort of show off, and Koreans, some of them obviously do like to entertain the crowd, it should have some sort of a thematic component to it, shouldn't it? Like, oh my God, he's going to put him in a box, and he comes out like the Undertaker or whatever. You got to do something, work on it, because just doing a dab. Like, I know that probably
totally
seems really
agree.
cool and edgy if you're a Korean. Like, that's like some shit from a year and a half ago, mate. Like, everyone got past that a long time ago. Even I don't think even Cam Newton does that anymore. So I just give that up. Move on to some new shit. If I hit me up, Pine, I'll give you some ideas, mate. We'll brainstorm.
You're gonna do his new entrance, but I agree.
Exactly.
Like, I was actually thinking about with Pine having the Undertaker thing, because like obviously the Pine box for the coffin and whatever really suits his name. And you remember in StarCraft, it was MC who came in with like the Undertaker entrance.
Yeah,
was absolutely fantastic. And Pine reminds me of MC, sort of like that goofy, larger than life personality. Not afraid to trash talk and have a good time. So that's I actually did think about exactly that circumstance myself. You got to have something special for when Pine comes in now,
especially if they're only going to use him on these rare occasions, because it needs to be that wrestling thing, like, oh, whose music is that? What the? Oh my God, it's Pine! And he's just coming out, Also to intimidate the opponents, Not least because, by the way, I just love the fact that. Like, that's what I like about the New York Excelsior team, actually. As a team, it's actually nuts how individually they've got so many good players, but they're not really that sick as a team. But that's why I want to see them against all the Western teams. Because remember when we had that Jake guy on and he was like, I don't think the Koreans are gods or anything. It's like, let's just line
5% better.
Let's just line them all up. Let's line up Jonak with any of yours and Yatas. Let's line up Pine with the McCrees. Let's just do it all. Let's see it. Listen, at least this team's going to give you the old puncher's chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm obviously famously a control map hater, but watching New York play control is one of my favorite things.
Fun, yeah. It's hard to predict which team is going to win control, but when New York plays it and Pine comes out, tips his little hat. It's crazy. It's fun.
I hope it continues. I hope this wasn't some sort of one-off fluke this week for them.
Who do you think was the most underwhelming player in week one? Like, who did you expect big things from? Or you thought this guy was good and just nothing happened? Is there anyone who didn't show up?
I'd have to think about that one. Maybe not Tivik. I always kind of rate him maybe higher than what I should, just because I think that flexibility in this game is something that is highly underrated. And I think Tivik is one of those guys that can come out and do some crazy things on way too many heroes.
Jake for me is a big one because I expected more versatility out of his selections, and he performed great on Junkrat and pretty middling on everything else. Another player is probably Seagull, because after day one, I wanted to see more Seagull. I was like, why didn't they keep Seagull in? He played well on Junkertown. That was the map they won against Seoul. And I was thinking to myself, why don't they put him on some of these control maps and try and see what he can do? And he was just like, it's like so bad on Ilios. So that was that was a bit disappointing. But he wasn't on the on Junkertown. Yeah, he was. Yes, he was on Junkertown again.
Any of the Koreans? Any Korean player didn't really.
Libero. Honestly,
he was kind of a bit underwhelming on the far right.
For a player that.
Just okay.
Yeah, he was okay at the projectile heroes and the projectile role, but he wasn't lighting my world on fire. Like, I expected a bit more from him. So that may be an issue for New York in the future, because I think the rest of their team is really strong. So do they need another DPS?
Because that's obviously a topic
but it's also like, do they want another DPS? How much does New York care about doing well this season when they get Flower next year?
No. Okay, so this is the question then, Monty.
Is their goal to win? Is their goal just to win in season 2? I don't know.
Because the thing is, they already obviously have some fantastic players. They already have Flower coming in. They've already got Pine settled into this role. And obviously Libero doesn't have to necessarily be playing something like Widowmaker ever in a game, right? So like, he's the player they're obviously working into the lineup. Is this just a work in progress?
Well, the thing about Libero is that I'm not sure if Libero's like the starting player you want. I think you play him more like Rascal on London, where he plays weird stuff, or again, very specific set strategies. Okay. And I think that what New York is doing right now is they're saying, okay, we have Flower. Sure, we can't have him for season 1 of Overwatch League, but we will transition Libero into more of a supportive DPS, occasionally subbed in role, and I actually think their plan's really smart, right? So you have Sabielby, who's just this rock of a Tracer player, who also can show up on Widowmaker and McCree and the other hit scans. Great, you always have that guy. You're going to have Flower, who is incredible when he's playing at his peak. Not the most consistent player, admittedly, but another year might fix that with him. You have Libero as your sort of sub-in player when you're running Assault or Escort, and you have a set strat. And then you have Pine as your sub-in player when you're running like something like Control, where it's a lot of deathmatch. So in that way, like, if you combine all 4 of those DPS players, I think you just have like this incredible core that you're using instead of strat by strat, more map by map. And then you've got some great tanks and some great supports to back it up too. So I think New York in the long run is going to be okay. I just think, like, if I'm New York, I'm like, okay, if we make the finals this year, that's like a huge fucking win for us. That's cool. If we make semis, cool, that's great. Because next year is the year for New York, right?
Yep.
Okay. And all the other ones, Florida, Fusion, next year, guys. It's all about next year.
Except New York already has Flower contract.
Yeah, exactly.
So their next year plan is already in place.
Okay.
Well, couldn't you say that like San Francisco's? Granted, it can still happen this year, but do you think that same kind of game plan could be San Francisco's overall concept leading into like stage 3, like you said, where they get their extra players?
I just think their plan is less complete. That's my issue with it. Is you ask yourself the question: is Sinatra on Tracer? How much better can he make this team based on what we've seen?
True,
maybe a little bit. How much is Super, who we haven't seen in a while, how much better is he going to make this team, especially when Nevix hasn't been playing badly? So I don't know. Like, is it good? Maybe they drastically improve the shot calling and that all gets better. Super, I know, is from talking to the San Francisco guys, is supposed to be very vocal and a very intuitive shot caller, even though he's very young. So maybe that changes.
Okay.
But I'm not as excited about that as I am thinking about what happens to all of the DPS players on New York when Flower enters the lineup and the like crazy good combinations they can have.
What do you think the best map to watch at the moment is?
The best, like in terms of skill, or the most fun to watch?
Just the best to watch.
Assault maps.
Yeah.
Assault maps between good teams.
Yeah.
Assault is like both the best and the worst to watch, because at the high end you get Anubis between Dallas and Seoul, and you get Horizon between Valiant and Dallas, and at the low end you get Horizon between Shanghai and San Francisco. So,
or that attack by Philly where they just kept running into, who was it, London, where they just kept running into they would just dive the enemy team instead of trying to take the point, like over and over, and they kind of didn't know what to do. Yeah, I think that Either that or Control, because I think Control can lend itself to just this crazy deathmatch style, and it's just kind of fun to watch. You know,
I hate it, except for when Pine's playing. Then it's okay.
Fair.
That's why I don't like it. So I like both Horizon and Anubis's maps. So it's I've been appreciated it, but the best ones are because it allows you so much time to set up and execute a strategy. It becomes much more clear what the teams are doing. The better teams can execute well, which often leads to very attack favor. That's where we were getting things like 5-5 draw on Horizon or 6-5 win for Seoul. And these are really exciting because you see the adaptation from the teams. Problem is that good teams are so coordinated on these maps because they have time to plan that when you get some teams like London against Philadelphia, they just sit there and full hold them, and it gets pretty boring.
That was one of the few things I will say, though, is that the scoring system was quite complicated, where it was like, it's a draw. We win. It's like, what?
Okay, well, that's another issue with the format. That's not my favorite. You know, it wasn't. Let's just say I was casting Dallas versus Seoul. You get those first two hype maps. You know, Dallas wins Junkertown, best map of the week, Temple of Anubis, and then all of a sudden it's like Ilios. You're like, okay, well, Dallas, you know, okay, they weren't done after that. I was thinking of the Valiant Dallas game where they drew on Horizon and Valiant already won. So if Valiant wins on Ilios, they're up 2 and there's no possibility for Dallas to win 2, so you just sort of play Numbani. So it's like, this is it, the third match. It's so good. If Dallas wins, then they can continue to fight. If Valiant win, then it's over. Then all of a sudden you're like, well, I guess we have to play map number 4 now. Pretty sure Dallas doesn't care about winning this map. Pretty sure they're like already done mentally, and it was not. It's not the most hype format in that way. Sometimes you just end up with scenarios there where you're like, well, shit, I don't really want to play map number 4. Or, but team's up 3-0. You're like, gotta watch this team get smashed again. Cool.
Now, you did mention earlier that you kind of, it would be interesting to see either a draft system or like a loser pick system. Do you think that would kind of remedy the situation, kind of take a bit from column A, column B, you give and take a little bit, so you do get to have a loser's pick, so the matches that you do get to play are a little bit more meaningful? I
think with the loser's pick, like you're saying, even if you've already lost the match, at least with a loser's pick, it's not as psychologically crushing because the losing team can still go in and say, okay, we're going to pick our best map. And, you know, it's a bit of a pick me up in that situation. So I think you definitely have the loser's pick there. It's also, by the way, less likely to create 3-0 scenarios in the first place, because if you just end up in a week where you have all your worst maps and then it's all the other team's best maps and they just smash you, you know, what do you say to that? There's not that much interest. But if there's a way to sort of mitigate the skill of the opponent while maximizing your own by having a plan of how you're going to draft the second map of the series, if you lose the first one, you'll just see more 1-1s naturally, right? Maybe not by a huge margin. We're not talking it would change like that much, but at least I would say it's fairly, I would say it would increase 1-1s by like 10-20%, which is better than what it is right now.
For sure. Definitely.
Or even if you lose 2 in a row, well, if you win the third one, you could still win the fourth one. And it becomes like a more exciting way to play the game. So I don't really see I don't know why they did that, honestly. I would have thought at least loser picks would stay in. I will say that one of the things that it does do is it's easier for production because they're not running around trying to figure out at the last second which team is playing which maps and then putting the graphics assets in there. So it may have been a production concern. Obviously, I don't advocate, if that is true, I don't advocate putting production ahead of the actual competitive format. So I would want to see that changed.